Welcome to Night Shift Delirium, a podcast about junior doctors and the world that surrounds them. I'm your host, Victoria, a junior doctor based in England. It's been a long time since season 2, and I hope everyone's been doing well. Welcome to our 3rd season. I'm really excited about all that we're going to talk about. We're starting season 3 with a conversation with George, a junior doctor based in England. For those of you that don't know, the junior doctors in the UK are currently striking for pay restoration in an attempt to save the NHS. I'm sure you'll enjoy the conversation just as much as I did. Welcome to our shift, y'all. Welcome, George, to Night Shift Delirium.
Thank you for having me on the pod. I'm good. I am recovering from the strike days at the moment, so I'm getting ready for night shifts.
Oh, are you doing nights tonight?
From Friday for the weekend.
Okay, well, let's get into it. We're going to talk about the protests and everything, but before we get into that, can you just share a little bit of your background?
So I am an F2 doctor doing standard foundation training rotations. I also work as a clinical teaching fellow with you in whatever little spare time I get. Before medicine, like during med school, I worked in the NHS in a variety of roles. I did healthcare assistant, I did administrative, and I did some management work as well. So I'm quite enthusiastic with regards to like management and leadership in the NHS, particularly like clinicians, and trying to get people involved in that side of quality improvement and leading for a sort of sustainable future in the medical workforce, really.
Yeah, I think you're an obvious leader. Like, I struggle sometimes when people say that someone is a natural born leader, because I think it's a skill set that is developed over time and people don't often put weight or credit, where it's due. And I think you're an obvious leader. So you came to our hospital, I guess, a couple years after I did. You hit the ground running. I literally go to you if I have questions about things, admin wise, or, a lot of the suits side of things, right? So like the administrative, business, whatever, organizational issues, you're definitely a resource to a lot of people. And I think a lot of people see that in you and recognize that in you. So yeah, I think that's awesome. I think it deserves its own acknowledgement.
Thank you. I think it's really difficult to be a junior doctor in the NHS and expect to be a leader. There's so much focus. I mean, even during medical school, you would have lectures and seminars on like doctors as leaders, and it's in our code of practice as well. But that's not something that you can teach someone. You have to foster them. You have to give them the opportunities. You have to create an environment that allows people to do that. I find that, particularly in the foundation program, it's a lot of tick boxing. There's a lot of things that you really want to make a difference. You want to make change, but you don't feel empowered to do so. And it's only, I think from my experiences, I've started working when I was 13. So I've got a lot of experience working in various different sectors and with different people, and you learn from those. Whereas for a lot of people, a lot of junior doctors starting in foundation training is their first job. They've never worked in the NHS before. They don't know necessarily how to deal with managers, corporate life. They're things that I've picked up over the years. So I really am passionate about bringing in doctors in a sort of not safe environment, but an environment that fosters any enthusiasm that they do have, because I think it's really important. And it's so easy for organisations in the NHS to create an environment that is quite hostile to doctors who are enthusiastic but don't feel they can make a difference.
Gosh, honestly, you've said so many things that I want to pick up on, and I hope I can remember each of them. I think talking about code of practice and being a leader, there's so much sometimes it feels like, isn't it, that looking at the code of practice, they're just like, well, throw that on there and it's their responsibility to do this. And it feels like whatever box it is that you have of responsibilities is constantly being like, things are being added to that box without necessarily like the systems to foster positive and important growth. Like, everyone has their lane. So I'm not saying that doctors are not leaders because obviously, you lead a cardiac arrest. You often lead and work with patients in their care, and you work within a team and lead that way, or like other juniors. But when it comes to the health administration side of things, doctors famously aren't that great at that. And I think it has a lot to do with the training, and the support to do that, especially in a system like the NHS, which is it's a big, massive. I mean, I think it's the number one employer in the UK or something. Don't quote me on that. I'm sure I can find
No,
that
it
somewhere.
is, yeah.
Okay. And it's a monopoly, really, for training and getting to the level of a consultant. So it doesn't really, it's a big system and it's hard. And there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of pathways. There's a lot of tick boxes, like you've mentioned. So it's difficult to challenge things, which I think is important in leadership. Not, the goal is always what you should be thinking about with leadership, right? Like it's not to just cause disruption, but it's disruption with the hopes of changing something. And I think,
Oh, absolutely.
that's the strongest thing that anyone can do is challenge something, because it means that you believe that it's capable of change and capable of the potential. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit later on. But when it comes to leadership, it's very hard. It's very hard because there's so many people and so many layers that you are challenging. And when you do that, especially as a junior and a foundation trainee, you're just starting out, really you're responsible for writing things and then also somehow cardiac arrest and things. It's hard. It's hard. So I think, yeah, you mentioned all of the things that I am in agreement with.
But all of those examples that you mentioned are such fantastic examples. And I think they often go unappreciated, leading cardiac arrest, giving advice to people, leading teams when you're on the medical take, as a senior registrar, all of those things are leadership. They are being able to manage people, manage expectations, communicate with people, all the facets that make a really good leader. And Tomorrow's Doctors and all those documents, I think they aspire to create really good doctors as leaders. And I think that's a really good thing to aim for. But what you need to do, and what I really believe in, is being able to give clinicians those opportunities to reflect on what they can do and actually say, you're going to be a consultant one day, or you're going to be a GP, you're going to be managing people, your businesses, business cases, all of those things which they're not at the forefront of our mind. And to be fair, we work in a system that doesn't give us the priority to those things, really. Our focus is on our clinical work predominantly, but actually you don't want to get to a situation where you're approaching CCT and you don't know how HR works, how budgets work. All of these things kind of sound boring, but they are the future of the NHS. They're how things run. We have to look at these things: quality improvement, business improvement. It's just a fact of what we have. And at the end of the day, doctors go into this because they want to make things better for patients. And that is just as much as, that leadership and that management side of things is just as important as the actual care we deliver, because without that backing and without a strong leadership behind us, we can't do that effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will clarify for people who don't know what CCT is. It's basically the final qualification in the UK before you become a consultant or an attending. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, because you don't, if only we could have the opportunity to apply the same sort of passion that we do in helping our patients make decisions to optimize their care towards the overall system. Because you're right, it does matter who decides how many registrars are going to be covering the night, who decides the rates for locums, for last minute cover, who decides the amount of training posts. All of these things are crucial. Who decides the amount of leave that you have, compassionate leave, maternity leave, paternity leave. Like there's so many different things. And you get sometimes, I don't know how to say, I want to say, but sometimes the focus becomes just the day to day, but actually the decisions on bigger, broader scales really impact our day to day. Because if they say, well, you need to just have clinic from 9 to 5 and don't you dare go a minute over. No one's saying don't you dare, but still. Those decisions are made by people who are often quite far removed from being clinicians. And so, yeah, I mean, if only there was some way to do some, like, I don't know, extra rotation. It would be nice if they also added in, hey, shadow a HR person for a day. I mean, I've had like nurses, often nurses who've trained elsewhere come in for a day, they get to sort of shadow a junior doctor, which I think is really helpful in understanding how the system works. And that interprofessional, interdisciplinary work is really important.
Yeah, it extends, like we always think of the MDT as like the people on the ward, the nurses, the physios, the dietitians, the doctors, but actually it's so much bigger than that. And you could go on and on thinking about who's actually involved. There are so many important people involved in every patient's journey. But you're right. And I think, we could probably take a leaf out of nurse training, because I know that nurses spend a lot of time with their nurse managers and leaders within their field. So it's certainly something that we should be aspiring to, I think.
Okay. So even going further backwards, why was medicine for you? What led you to the path of being a doctor?
I feel like I'm in my medical school interview again. All those many moons ago. I think it's a difficult one, and it's not clear cut for me. I mean, I don't come from a medical family. I'm just the first doctor in my family. I enjoyed the science subjects at school. As I said, I've been working from the age of 13. I used to work in hospitality mostly and customer service. So I enjoy interacting with people. And for me, it was that combination, however cliche it may sound, of, an enjoyment of academia, particularly like a STEM subject, with being able to speak to people all day, use my skills, help people through that route, I think. And I think I'm, a naturally empathetic, caring person. And that gave me some opportunities, I think, to explore medicine further and through work experience. And I volunteered in a hospital for 4 years, and I just enjoyed being in that environment and learning from the people around me as well, and from patients.
And I think the one thing I would just say, I mean, not to speak for you, but is you're a leader. And like, doctors aren't leaders, even though we've just said all these things. You are a leader. And especially when you're looking in healthcare, the leaders are doctors. So I think that's, absolutely something that probably, maybe, even if unknowingly, contributed to your path.
Yeah, probably. And I think it did give me that opportunity. Like, I think medicine is such an innovative field, that we see opportunities popping up all the time that, I don't even see. And I think that's incredible when I hear about what people are doing and what fields they're going in, who they're working with. I think the field of tech is incredible to look at, and how we're working with our other colleagues in STEM. So that's something I'm really excited for on the horizon. I think it's really easy to become, firstly, a bit overwhelmed though sometimes, because it feels like, oh my God, I've got so many opportunities. Where do I go? But also, if you want to be a leader, you can very easily become burnt out, because as I said, you can be 48 hours a week plus any unpaid overtime just doing your clinical work, and trying to make space in your life and have that self-care. It can be really difficult. And I've fallen foul of that a few times.
Yeah, I love that you said that there's so many different options that it's overwhelming, because I think people have a very limited view of like what you can do in medicine, what you can do as a doctor. And that's part of what I talk about a lot on this podcast, about other things that are non-traditional. We won't have time to get into all of that today because, well, we're going to talk about the strikes. But I think maybe another time you can come on and we'll explore that further. Stages of intern year as protest songs. Stage 1. First I was afraid, I was petrified. Iconic introductory lyrics to a song with a strong conclusion of I Will Survive. The song, I Will Survive by Gloria Gaynor. Starting out intern year is terrifying in many ways. In fact, I can't imagine a world where those words don't resonate. But hopefully, along the way, you reach the stage of acceptance, where you know that despite the challenge, you will survive. Stage 2. The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. A musical poem by Jill Scott Heron. This is the middle humdrum part of intern year, because quite literally, who has time for television? One line that stands out is when Scott Heron says, the revolution will put you in the driver's seat. Hopefully, approaching the end of this part of intern year, you start to feel more autonomous and understand that all of the work that either keeps you from the television or may feel unseen by outsiders is to sharpen your clinical knowledge and skills. Lastly, as you approach the end of intern year, stage 3, you're more confident. You have an appreciation and awareness of what it means to be an intern in the grand scope of residency and your professional life. The last song of intern year resonates deeply as Kendrick Lamar says, "We gon' be all right. Do you hear me? Do you feel me? We gon' be all right." Protest songs are songs of survival, rebirth, and at best are aspirational. My wish for all of my fellow incoming interns is that we acknowledge any fears and insecurities and tackle each challenge with stride and humility. And hopefully, at the end of the year, we can all sing with pride, "We gon' be all right." It's strike week, which is 3 days of strikes of junior doctors in the UK via the BMA. Do you want to give the people a little bit of an explanation? I know there's a lot of various narratives that are out there, some misinformation, some true information. What are your thoughts on the strike, or give us a little bit of a background about it?
So speaking this from a personal perspective of I am a representative of colleagues at my hospital, but, not speaking on behalf of the BMA, but over the last 15 years, regardless of whether, what price index you look at or whatever, doctors' pay has depreciated in value by at least 20%, some say 26, some say higher. And, the sole aim of these strikes is pay restoration and getting doctors' pay back up to what it should be if it hadn't been subjected to so many cuts, so many austerity measures and depreciation over time. And the reason why this is so important now is because we are at a workforce crisis in the NHS. Among so many different staff, we have 1 in 10 NHS posts vacant and not being filled at the moment. We have tens of thousands of vacant medical places, yet we have medical students coming through and graduating every year. So something's not adding up. And pay restoration, we feel, is like the really most important first step, because junior doctors are leaving, and they're leaving because they're not getting paid enough to pay their bills. I don't like the comparison to other professions, but I think when you see headlines in the news saying that first-year junior doctors who, as you mentioned, are attending and leading cardiac arrest, they're doing life-saving care every day, are getting paid less than a barista in a coffee shop, despite years of training and tens of thousands of pounds of student debt, I think it's demoralizing, because it is a really tough career to commit to. And I think the commitment is often underappreciated. Like, you have to really, really commit to this profession. From the start of medical school, you're having to do long hours, you're having to say no to social commitments, you have to pass really hard exams all the time, short holidays, all those kind of things that most people don't experience. I mean, I know our healthcare colleagues do, but it's not easy, and it doesn't stop when you graduate. It's not like there's a pot of gold at the end of it. It's just another step in your career. So pay restoration is at the forefront, and that is for the benefit of our patients as well, because we know that we're losing doctors. We're losing doctors abroad. We're losing doctors to other industries. Doctors are getting burnt out. Consultants are retiring early because they can't afford to keep working anymore because they're being taxed too much in their pensions. And that may have changed in the budget. I don't know, but we'll see. So I think there's a lot of feeling behind this. We've worked really hard over the last 3 years, harder than we've ever felt before. Through COVID, we all took on different roles. I worked in the Nightingale Hospital with junior doctor colleagues. And I think it's got to the point where enough is enough, because we need to keep doctors. We need to keep it an attractive profession, because it is harder than it's ever been. The work is exhausting. We're all doing overtime. We're all going above and beyond, and we're not being remunerated fairly for it. And that's having an impact on our patients, because we can't deliver the care that we want to. It is part of a systemic reflection of the NHS, and I think we all appreciate that. But this is the first step, and we need to achieve this in order to keep people in this country, in this profession, and reduce the risk of burnout.
Yeah, I think there's so much. I mean, from my stance as a junior, the junior doctor strikes is about making the NHS better. It's about making patients have the best care possible. And the NHS is such an institution in England. It's a bright light historically, a model for the world in terms of socialized care. But the NHS is a title, but who the NHS is are the people, right? Like the
Absolutely.
people, the junior doctors, the nurses, the cooks, the cleaners, the everybody. So many different parts. As we said, it's the largest employer in the UK. And if we value the NHS as an institution, we have to value the people.
Yeah,
And
and we all want to keep working for the NHS. We love
yeah,
the NHS. Like, we trained in the NHS, we use the NHS, we love it. But it just gets to the point for each individual that you have to balance up what you need in your life. And it goes back to a degree of self-care as well, because
yeah,
if you're struggling to pay your bills, and you're having to, because, you know, junior doctors, I don't think a lot of people appreciate the corporate benefits that you would get from an equivalent highly valued profession do not exist in it. So we have to pay all our own fees. We have to pay our registration, our indemnity. We have to pay for all of our mandatory exams, which are hundreds and thousands of pounds. And we're always having to move across the country in order to fulfill our training requirements with little, discretion given to personal factors. And those all contribute to you reevaluating, like, if this is what you want to do for yourself, because we want to be working in the NHS, we want to be working as doctors in the NHS, but it gets to the point where that balance is going to be tipped for a lot of people, and we're seeing it year after year, and it's getting worse. So we need to have a look at this pay restoration. It's not a pay rise. And I think there's that narrative that doctors are asking for 35% pay rise. Well, if you look at all of the graphs, compare us to the public sector, compare us to the private sector, doctors have lost the most. Doctors' pay has depreciated year on year because we don't strike. Striking is a complete last resort, and it's not what we want to do. But ultimately, we are feeling devalued, and the government is not coming to the table, and they're not offering us anything. We are not, kicking and screaming every year asking for more, which is why we've completely fallen under the radar, and it's got to breaking point.
Yeah, I think so. I want to delineate a few things for people. So, firstly, junior doctor, what that means. So, a junior doctor is someone who's completed medical school. So, at any point from foundation, which is 2 years, and then there's the core training, which is usually 2 to 3 years. And then after that, there's additional, let's say, 4 years maybe. The alternative is if you are a GP, you still have to do that 2 years of foundation and then 3 years of GP specific training. And often in between all of that, because that's quite a long time, people take breaks. So they might take a year to do teaching, they might take a year to do research or locuming for whatever reason, because it's a difficult time, isn't it? So there's burnout. There's also people that just have lives. You want to get money to buy a house because the salary isn't enough to do that, or get money to get married, or, take a vacation. And also at every stage, you have to apply. And the stakes are getting higher and higher. So there's more that's needed. You don't really have a lot of time to do research or teaching sometimes. So sometimes people take an extra year to do that as well. So the title of junior doctor is something that can span from 5 years minimum to 10, 15 years of being a doctor, where actually overnight, especially, you may be the most senior doctor. So in the event of a cardiac arrest or the event of any medical emergency, the junior doctor is the one that's taking care of you. So it's not that you're a student or without responsibilities. There's quite a lot of responsibility. So I think that's really important to talk about, what a junior doctor is. Also the amount of time that I've mentioned. And as you mentioned, moving around. So in England, if you're applying to be, let's say, a gastroenterologist or something, for your foundation, you might be in one part of the UK. For your core, you might be in another part of the UK. And in between your core, you might be needing to shift in hospitals, to different hospitals that may be an hour or an hour and a half away from year to year. After that, going on into your registrar training is another time where you're moving to another place, and you may be, moving in between hospitals again. And I think that value or that impact cannot be understated. You're asking for essentially a decade of moving around without the ability to establish roots in people who may or may not have families, or even outside of the family side of it. You as an individual have a right to, establish roots in community. And it's very difficult to do that when physically you're being moved around the nation. And really, you're giving up a lot during that time as well. Like, you're missing holidays. You can't take every holiday off. You miss weddings, you miss funerals, you miss so many different things, you miss weekends, nights. Your sleep is affected for a decade. And so I think when people are talking about, you've mentioned the comparison to other industries, no one is saying pay someone less. No one is saying that. I think what people are saying is the requirement to be a doctor is very different than the requirement for other industries. And the pay is either the same or better in other industries, despite the requirements to even get the job and the requirements and tax that it takes on your own life, and also the impact of what you're doing. Listen, don't get me wrong. Everyone plays a role and everyone is important. But when you start showing signs of not having life, the people that are coming to provide that care to possibly and hopefully reverse that are not necessarily being valued. And I think that's a really important thing to sort of delineate.
And I think a good way to sort of summarize that sort of insecurity over such a long period of time is a loss of autonomy. You feel like you've got no autonomy over your life. And that is a real reflection of our junior doctors today and our consultant colleagues who've been through it, is the amount of dedication that you give to one employer, to one career choice for so long. You might have children, you might have caring responsibilities for other people that you have to factor in, and you have to change your whole world often upside down to facilitate that. I mean, I'm 8 years into my career. I've moved 7 times. It's exhausting. It's financially draining. And I've got a long way to go. And when, you're at the end of that specialty training, you're 15 years down the line and you're getting paid £28 an hour on top of being the most senior person in the whole hospital, that is, in my view, completely undervaluing the individual and the professional.
And, people are leaving. We all, we know people who are leaving. And, it is what it is. So I think we've established now what the reason and the purpose is behind all of the strikes. How did you find the picket this week? So this week it was 3 days, which was voted on by members of the BMA, who came out in record-breaking numbers in support of the strike. So the action was not going into work during those 3 days. And then the visible action were pickets and demonstrations. So how did you find all of that this week?
I thought it went really, really well. I mean, as you mentioned, we had an incredible mandate for taking industrial action. As I said, BMA turned up to the table months and months in advance. Sadly, the health secretary and the government didn't. So we did get to a point where we had no other option but to take industrial action and withdraw from care. And I'll say it time and time again, we don't take it lightly. We would rather be at work, but we'd equally rather do meaningful negotiations in advance of getting to that point. But that didn't happen. So 98% of the 77% of BMA members voted. And there was a 98% in favour of industrial action, which is an incredible mandate for taking the action that we did. I think the strength of feeling that I felt on the picket, and you may have felt it as well, was incredible support from the public, from our colleagues, from patients. We had patients joining us on the picket line, which was amazing, and real words of encouragement. There was definitely like a strength of feeling across the board that this is the action that we need to take, that we need to call for full pay restoration, and we need it now. I think it was disappointing, perhaps in certain areas of the media, that we didn't get as much media coverage as we may have liked, because, that is really important to be able to tell our side of it and our side of the story. And some of the media representation I felt was slightly misleading in some cases, but that goes to reflect that our cause is not often known about. And we do feel underappreciated in that sense. A lot of people don't understand the complexity of our lives and our training. So this, in a way, has given us an opportunity to help leaders in the government and the public sector, as well as the public, give them a bit more of an understanding of what we're going through and what and why we're calling for it.
Yeah, I really was very happy. I mean, people may be able to hear I'm kind of recovering from a respiratory infection, but I wasn't able to go the first day. But the second and third day, I did go, and I was just so moved, honestly. Yeah, I mean, I think working sometimes you forget about, you get stuck in the details sometimes, right? So it was really nice, one, to like be able to commune with my colleagues in different specialties at different levels of training or working.
Which we don't get enough of.
We don't get a lot of that at all. There's so many, like, there was a registrar. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know there were registrars in this specialty here. Yeah. So I really loved that time together. But I was just really touched by the amount of people who were honking their horns in support. A lot of the consultants, were definitely in support. They sent various correspondence and often were saying, we're taking care of patients. So don't feel that what you're doing is taking away from their care, because we're here. The most competent, most qualified people are there. They were covering the hospital morning through, 24 hours, which is phenomenal. I felt the support from my seniors. I felt the support from patients, as you said, that came out to the picket, people honking their horns. I take the bus in every day. A lot of the bus drivers cheering me on as they're dropping me off. I felt such a sense of community. It's really the value that we all are kind of speaking about. Yes, the verbal support and feedback is important. Obviously, we're not negating that, but it just gave me a moment of reflection, gave me a nice time to reflect on what the NHS is and how valuable and how important it is and how important the work of trying to save the NHS through this strike is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I've sort of almost lost for words because I think you summed it up perfectly. It's the beginning is one thing that I would add, is that all of this support is great, but until the government comes to us and sits around the table, nothing is going to change, and the exodus of doctors will just continue. I think your insight as someone who has experience in a different health system is so valuable, and is something that we really need to take forward, because we will be losing people to the States and we will be losing more people to other countries. And I feel that pay restoration is the first step in actually stopping that outflow.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. So what do you think is next? I mean, we've done the first round of the strikes. How do we proceed from here?
I think that the ball is very much in the government's court at this point. I mean, as I said, from the outset of when we even started discussing the possibility of industrial action back in August of last year, we've been trying to approach the government. We've been trying to get meaningful negotiations, and we have not been able to do that. I mean, we had a last minute request from the health secretary 48 hours before the strikes were due to start, at which point we'd already cancelled all of the lists that we had to cancel and the clinics and arranged all the cover. So that was just simply not feasible. And it came with completely unachievable preconditions that were just not fair at all. So we've completed this. We know our patients have been safe. We've engaged at every local level with our trusts to make sure that prior to leaving for industrial action, our patients were safe. So we just need negotiations to start, and that is on the government. We're ready, we're at the table, and we want to talk, and that's with them now.
Yeah. Oh, I will just clarify, because I don't think we fully said it. BMA is the British Medical Association, which is the union for doctors and I think medical students as well in England. So if they don't begin discussions, then what do we do?
I think it's really difficult to say. A lot of that decision making will rest with our negotiating team, with our executive, our junior doctor committee, who are all elected representatives, and they will take it forward. And if it comes to an agreement that they feel is acceptable to us, they'll put it to us as the voting population. At this point, I think that seems quite far off, because we are just not getting anything from the other side, as I understand it at the moment. We have our annual Junior Doctor Conference at the BMA coming up soon. There are also other unions involved. We have the I think it's HDSA, the Hospital Doctors Specialist Association, and also the unions representing dentists are also, because they're on the same pay circular as we are. So I think we will need to make more progress around the table. And we have a mandate for 6 months. So it's very possible, I think, that we may need to take further industrial action if we don't make meaningful progress with the government.
Well, this is a big question. Where do you think the NHS is going?
That is so difficult to say.
I did say it's a big question.
It's something I think about a lot. And I think it's really difficult, and I am fully aware of this. I'm very self-aware that my view may be slightly rose-tinted because, as I say, I love the NHS. We love the NHS as Brits, as an institution, versus perhaps as an employer. It's somewhat different. The experience is somewhat different. So I would like to see the NHS succeed and be able to deliver the care that it should and that it was set up to deliver to all patients across the country. I think unless the workforce crisis is dealt with soon as a matter of priority and the NHS gets the resourcing it needs, it will not be sustainable in its current fashion. I mean, yesterday I saw a talk from Jeremy Hunt speaking to the Financial Times back in September saying, well, what's the point in targets? Because all it means is that managers and senior clinicians are focused on targets. And to an extent, I agree. But equally, if you take away all the targets, where are we going? We have nothing to aim for. And if we look at the statistics from the NHS over the last 13 years, we've missed all of our targets and they just get worse. Our performance is getting worse. And that is not for will of the people that are trying to deliver it. You know, nurses are working harder, doctors are working harder, and that is no over-exaggeration. We as a team, as a national team, are genuinely trying to do everything that we can for the patients. But until we have the resources that we need, and that includes people, we're not going to be able to do that. And that is in the hands of the government and the Department of Health and Social Care. So it's all on the fence, I think. I think there's no simple answer for that question, because I think that until we really sort that situation out, nothing is going to change for the better. We all want it to. We all want to cut down waiting lists. We want to operate. So I know surgeons would operate day and night if they could. They absolutely would. But are the resources available? No, they're not. So, yeah, I think it's a really difficult one to answer.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's, to be honest, every single day since I entered this country, someone or maybe 5 people ask me a day, what do you think of the NHS? How does it compare to America? Da, da, da. Is it, should we do this? Should we do that? And I think I came to England for the NHS. That is it. I don't have any other tie here. I mean, I did qualify from a UK medical school, but I came here to work for the NHS because I believe in the NHS. I think it's a phenomenal concept. I think it's a phenomenal institution. And I hope that everyone endeavors to preserve it, not in its current state, but where it was and where it has the potential to be. So, yeah, I don't know where the future is, but I hope that moving forward, the future is bright.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you know, I've talked about innovation earlier in our chat today. I think that's really important. We really need to harness all of that innovation that we can. And there are examples of that, but I think that really needs to escalate and ramp up to the next level, because people are getting older. Our population is getting older, more complex, health conditions that we never saw 20, 30 years ago, or when the NHS was founded, are now becoming an issue for us, and we need to adapt. And at the moment, we're too slow. We don't have the resources, and people are living longer and living better lives, which is great. That's what we all want as doctors, but you have to have a system in place that can support that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for everything. George, I've got one last question. What's your favorite protest song for the week?
Oh, that is a hard one. Let me have a think. I love the chants that we did. You know, we wanted Steve at the picket line. Where was Steve? I don't know. 5, 6, 7, 8. Come on, Steve, negotiate. That was a good one. Oh my God, you've really put me on the spot here. A lot of the classic picket line songs, like Billy Bragg, Standing with the Union, that kind of thing. I think that kind of got everyone going.
Nice. I will say mine is unsurprisingly my queen, Beyonce, Break My Soul.
Yeah.
Not that anyone's trying to break anyone's soul, but it's a song about liberation and being the best possible version of yourself. And, I believe in that for the NHS. So
Yeah, I'm going to update my answer. And this is a very literal interpretation, but you saw me dancing away to it. Is Taylor Swift, Look What You Made Me Do? Because I think that is a reflection of everything that we were feeling.
Well, thank you so much, George. This has been lovely.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a privilege and a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed the first episode of season 3 with George as we spoke about the strikes in England. There is a lot of information out there, so I would guide you all to the British Medical Association's website if you have any further inquiries or questions about the strikes. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you tune in for the rest of the season. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Night Shift Delirium, and go ahead and subscribe and rate us. Give us a 5-star review wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast. So welcome back, and we will see you on our next shift.